everybody, and welcome to another Stud Stories. This one, one of the first Stud Stories that we did, and it's been up for at least 2 months on the site on Southeastern Rewind, and thanks everybody for being there and supporting that Southeastern Rewind. It's pretty amazing how fast it's growing. But one of the first Stud Stories that we did was on Vince, and it was called Vince Invades, and it was basically the story of Vince coming to Birmingham, Alabama, to try to close down Continental Wrestling in 1985. And I think fans going to find this very interesting. I wish we had some of the footage from back in that time frame, but we don't. But I'm going to start a series. I want to do a series on Vince and on WWF, which turned into WWE, that went on to take over wrestling and changed the sport entirely. And I'm going to do a series now on Vince. And now we've already got the one that's called Vince Invades. And this one is just going to be called a Vince series. Then I'm going to do them on all different types of subjects. But this particular one, I want to take fans back and walk them through kind of some of the history of wrestling. And I guess I have maybe a different perspective of the history of wrestling than a lot of other people. My family had been in it for 100 years. So, for me, it's a life experience. It's what I saw, and not only what I know and what I did when I was in it, but some of what my father did and my grandfather did. And Vince came from a wrestling family, Vince Jr. And Vince Sr. was a great guy, and I really enjoyed being around Vince Sr. He was a really good person, and so. Let's go back and talk about what I want to discuss basically today is the subject matter I want to begin with is the wrestling in the South and how different it was than wrestling in the North. And I want to talk about why that is. I'm sure people ask that question, why is it wrestling was different in different parts of the country? And so to get that story right, I want to start, I guess, with Vince's family, and I want to talk about Senior. And Vince Senior came along. He's in New York. He's up in the Northeast. He's in some of the biggest cities in the country, in America. Vince always liked, and I was able to go up there. I wrestled for Vince in 1973 in Madison Square Garden. I wrestled for him in Philadelphia. So I'm familiar with Vince Senior. And Vince liked big guys. He wasn't a huge fan of the actual wrestling of the sport itself, and certainly not shooters. He had, it wasn't important to him if you had background in wrestling and you knew how to shoot and you knew how to hurt people if you needed to. That wasn't important to him. He wanted the big guys. He wanted the gorilla monsoons that weighed about 400 pounds. The original really tough old son of a gun, man. Killer Kowalski, that type of guy. 6'5", 300. He wanted his wrestlers to be 300 pounds or more. And when you get wrestlers at 300 pounds, you're going to get a lot of punches you can hear across the building, but you're going to get a really slow match. They're not in really good shape, and they're awfully big. And so the matches that he was having in that part of the country, and not just him, I'm going to include the Sheik out of Ohio. Still up there, right up to the Great Lakes, still in the northern part of the country. Dick the Bruiser, Indianapolis, same type of style. A lot of those guys were very interested in big guys. And so in the South, it was totally different. not just the wrestling was different, but the wrestlers themselves. Instead of being 300 pounds, you found a lot of guys in the South that were 200 pounds and some up to 240, but there was a different mindset, and most of those guys were shooters. And I have to go back and my grandfather started in 1920 in Columbus, Ohio. He was trained by a great shooter, Dutch Mantell, out in Amarillo, Texas, out in that area. And my granddad, he was a great shooter, and he in the Columbus, Ohio territory that Dutch Mantell sent him to. He sent him there because there was a lot of other shooters there. And their style back in the 1920s was a lot of wrestling. It was very, very important that you wrestle. And so when Roy left Ohio and he went and created his own company in Tennessee and ended up in 12 states around Tennessee, he was pretty much the predominant big-time promoter in all of the South, just about. And his influence began to wear off on other people, but he brought in shooters. And not only that, but he taught his brothers. He taught his brother Herb to shoot, and he taught his brother Jack to shoot. And later on, he's got a younger brother that's 20 years younger than him that he's going to teach him to shoot. His name was Lester. Anyway, he brought in all these shooters, and he brought in guys that could wrestle, and hammerlocks you were in vogue in the South rather than high spots in the North. It was a different style of match that was being had in the South than it was in the northern part of the country. So, and Roy being in Tennessee, he affected promoters that are going to get involved in the 30s and in the 40s that saw his wrestling. And a prime example, let's talk about Jim Crockett Sr. Jim Crockett Sr. was from Bristol, Tennessee. And Roy, that was part of Roy's territory. So Jim Crockett Sr. grew up watching Roy Welch and Herb Welch and a lot of old shooters like Tex Riley and Charlie Carr and a number of great old shooters. And when he started his own company in Charlotte, North Carolina, a Southern company, he instituted and he looked for that same type of wrestler. That's what he wanted to get. That went down to Cowboy Luttrell in the 1930s and 40s. Cowboy Luttrell in the state of Florida wrestled up in Tennessee with Roy. And when he went to Florida and started his company, he wanted to have the same type of wrestlers and the same type of wrestling. So this spread across the South. When you looked at the even on into the 50s and 60s, when the promoters began to change and the guys would get old and somebody else would come in and take over. A great example, another Southern operation, is Leroy McGurk in Oklahoma. One of the greatest wrestlers ever, man, and great junior heavyweight champion. Was blinded and couldn't wrestle anymore. But he ended up turning his territory and selling his territory to Bill Watts. And Bill Watts was a Southern promoter. He liked the Southern talent. He liked that Southern style. So you've got that Oklahoma and Louisiana and all that area now that's filled with it. You got Blanchard out there in Texas. You've got the Von Erichs in Dallas. You've got Bosch, who is the famous Houston promoter. Had one of the greatest cities in America, brought wrestlers in from everywhere. Same process though, same style. He was in the South, he stuck to that Southern style. And so you had a different type of wrestling going on in the northern part of the country than you had going on in the South. And so when Vince Jr. came along, he only got to see what his daddy had. He didn't spend a lot of time in the South. I bet you Vince Jr. probably never saw 3 matches in the Southern United States before he took over his daddy's company. So all he knew was the big guys and the slow matches And, so it was a different thing entirely than what was going on in the South. He had no respect, basically, for guys that were great wrestlers. He wouldn't even, as an example, I don't think he ever used Jack Briscoe. Ever in his WWE, and when he got it from his dad, it was still WWF. But even as he started to take a few guys, he took Dusty that came in there and did a few shows for him, and there were some other guys. Jerry Briscoe went up there and worked for him in his company. But I don't know that he ever even used a guy like Jack Briscoe, because Jack Briscoe was so wrestling oriented, he didn't feel comfortable with that type of talent. So there's a big difference in what's going on in the North and what was going on in the South. And we come to a time frame of about 1983, 84. I'm running Southeastern. Southeastern at that point is basically along the Gulf Coast, Alabama, Mississippi, up into Georgia. In 85, we start our Continental Television in Birmingham with Gordon Soley. And that Continental TV was a spectacular program. It was one of the first, and I think it was the first, to shoot in a major arena that ran every week on the same night and shoot your TV in that arena with those thousands and thousands of fans. Well, in 1984, when this was just about to happen, and we were going to go to Continental, there was a company in Houston, Texas that got into touch with me, and they said, Ron, we love your program. We love your show. You've got great wrestlers. And they had been doing their homework. They mentioned a lot of names. And they said, if you could do a program from a major arena and make it a big time event, right commentator and great production, that we think that there's a potential that NBC is interested in a national television program. And they said, if you are willing to try to do this, we'll get you into New York. We will get you that appointment with NBC. So in 1985, I changed to Continental. They loved the program. Almost instantly, they got me the appointment in New York, and I went to New York and stayed there 2 days. And I went to the big NBC building, and wow, it was a real experience for me. They played them tapes. We probably played 4 tapes that they saw, and they were just blown away by it. No one was doing it at that point. In that time, nobody was doing these big arena shows. And the big crowd, and Gordon Soley, as great as he was at his job, we had great wrestlers and great talent, and it was Southern style, and that blew them away. They were like, "Wow, we've never seen this type of wrestling. This is totally different than what we're used to." So they basically sent me 3 days later an offer. They said, "We want to do a show. We want to do an NBC national show." Now, there was no national shows. There were a few little things that were getting started at that point. Vince Jr. had just got in. His dad had just turned things over to him, and he was trying to get on these different stations. The closest thing to a national program at that time was TBS out of Atlanta. Now, he's going to get his hands on TBS, but this NBC program, and the opportunity that it offered was just so far superior to anything that anybody had in the country. So I got this offer from NBC in 1985. And they said, we want to do a national program, and we want to do it just what you're producing it right now. They weren't going to send down a special crew. They loved what the product was. And they loved the name because it was Continental. It indicated that it was all across America. And so I spent some time thinking about it. And I made a decision that probably changed wrestling. I decided, because I was a member of the NWA, and that when I got a program like that, that I'm going to be I'm going to put myself in a position to have every other member of the NWA distrust me, be hesitant about what's he going to do. Is he going to take over everybody's stuff, or how will he handle this? And I had a conversation with a couple of NWA promoters, and they were really worried about it. You know, Ron, you're going to be in a position if you do this to take over if you wanted to. And I did convince them that I had no interest in taking over. And honestly, I really, at this point, I'd been in the business for quite a while. It was my third company that I had operated, and I was burning out. I was wearing out. I really didn't know that I wanted to jump into a commitment to run a national show and then have to run matches all over the country. So I turned down the offer from NBC, and Vince went right in behind me, and they took Vince. That decision, you know, if I had gotten the program, they would have seen a totally different type of wrestling across America than what they saw with Vince. They got the Hulk Hogan and the big guys that came in that worked for Vince, but they didn't get that Southern style of wrestling and the great angles and the great interviewers, the Dusties and all those guys back in those days. It probably changed wrestling. It might have been a defining moment in not only my life and Vince's life. He might not have pushed to put everybody out of business had he not had a national program. It may have changed wrestling. And so this is in the first of series that I'm going to do on Vince. We're going to talk about all different aspects of this, not just the history of how these TVs got started and that type of stuff, but we're going to go on to discuss other parts of wrestling and how Vince taking over affected everybody. And I appreciate everybody joining me here today. This is going to be a series. I have done a series on my wrestling 11 different NWA world champions. And it's been very popular. In fact, the Dusty Rhodes one that just came out is just on fire, man. So this is a series about basically what happened to wrestling and why it is where it is today, and where it might have been had some of us made different decisions. And thank y'all all so much for joining me today, and I look forward to this series.